They mocked my accent at work until I revealed who I really am. The CEO's face went pale when I switched from my broken English to perfect British accent in the middle of the meeting. As I was saying before being interrupted, I actually wrote the textbook you just quoted incorrectly. I never planned to hide my background when I started at Parker Financial, but on my first day, I noticed how my colleagues snickered when I pronounced certain words. My name is Bollier, I am Chinese-British, and I grew up between Shanghai and London. My accent naturally blends both worlds. After overhearing two senior managers mimicking how I said quarterly report, I made a split-second decision. If they wanted to underestimate me based on my accent, I'd let them. Sometimes invisibility is strategic. For 6 months, I leaned into their expectations. I deliberately mispronounced financial terms I'd been using since graduate school. I pretended not to understand complex concepts I could explain in my sleep. I watched as my ideas were dismissed in meetings only to be celebrated when repeated by white colleagues. Sarah from Epteen's was the worst. She'd interrupt me with what Billy is trying to say is before simplifying concepts I hadn't finished explaining. She'd speak louder and slower around me as if volume was the issue. When presenting data I'd analyzed, she'd tell clients, our team did this despite language barriers. Last week, everything changed. Our biggest client was considering pulling their $50 million account. The CEO called an emergency meeting with the executive team, Perrin and me, since I'd built the financial model they needed. As I began presenting, Sarah interrupted. The numbers are quite complex. The CEO looked annoyed at the delay. Let's just hear from Balak first. I continued deliberately stumbling over technical terms while Sarah smirked at her colleagues. When I reached the critical analysis, Sarah cut in again. What Bali is struggling to communicate is that, actually, I said, dropping the accent entirely and speaking in my crisp British English. What I am struggling with is your persistent interruption, Sarah. The room froze. Our CEO's coffee cup stopped midway to his mouth. As I was saying, I continued. The client's portfolio shows clear indications of market timing attempts, which contradicts their stated long-term investment strategy. They're essentially betting against the very positions we've recommended. Sarah's face flushed crimson. You. Yes, my accent. I smiled. Fascinating how it disappeared the moment it became inconvenient for you. Almost as fascinating as how you've been taking credit for my work for 6 months. I turned to our stunned CEO. I have a PhD in financial economics from Cambridge. I literally wrote one of the textbooks on portfolio theory that Sarah misquoted in last month's presentation. I've been watching this company make decisions based on incomplete information because you assumed my accent reflected my competence. The silence was delicious. Then our CEO cleared his throat. I think we need to have a larger conversation after this meeting. But right now, please continue, Dr. Liu. I did. I saved the client relationship, and I watched as Sarah was reassigned the following week. Yesterday, the CEO called me into his office and offered me Sarah's recently vacated position along with a substantial raise. One question, he said. Why not just use your British accent from the beginning? I smiled. Would you have learned anything if I had? Some lessons cost $50 million to learn. Some cost only your pride.